The kettle clicked off. I hadn't poured the water yet. It just sat there, cooling on the counter, beside the same chipped teacup I'd used every morning since 1998. I ran my finger along the rim. A faint crack spidered from the edge, barely visible, like me. Across the room, the clock on the wall had stopped again. It always froze at 3:17 p.m., the time Harold died in the factory fall. I used to reset it. Now I just let it be. Maybe some things wanted to be still. I sat in my armchair, tucked my legs under the wool throw Harold's mother had crocheted. The yarn had frayed in places, but it was warm, familiar. Outside, snow brushed gently against the kitchen window. A soft hush. Inside, my hands rested in my lap, holding the envelope Jessica left on her way out. Just my name in blue ink. No greeting, no love. Jess. I already knew what it said. She wanted me to co-sign again. Said it was just a formality. Said this time would be different. I looked down at the envelope, then at the teacup. The kettle, the clock, my whole life, had been spent making sure everyone else stayed warm, safe. Dreams postponed, needs set aside. Bills paid without a word. I reached for my old savings journal, tucked beneath the cushion. Flipped to the last page. 5,083. I stared at the number. A whole life of giving. And this was what remained. I turned to the back cover. Blank. Except for a note I must have scribbled in a half-sleep. 3 words. I was useful, not loved. A cold thought for a cold evening. The frost had crept in overnight. I opened the curtains and watched the cold light spill across the wooden floor. Even inside, I could feel the air shift. That dry, brittle kind of stillness only Indiana winters knew. The maple tree out front stood naked and proud. Its branches etched sharp lines across the window pane. Harold planted it the summer after our 3rd child was born. He wore those ridiculous plaid shorts. Kept patting the soil like it was a sleeping baby. He never saw it bloom the way I did. I ran a hand over the kitchen counter, the wood worn smooth where I used to knead dough every morning. Back then, 4:45 a.m. meant coffee in a chipped mug and the soft thud of the mixer coming to life. The bakery smelled of cinnamon and yeast. There was music, too. Not from speakers, but from laughter, elbows touching in tight spaces, flour dusting the air like snow. Those mornings were loud. Alive now, the silence stretched. My slippers made a soft brushing sound against the linoleum. I counted the steps out of habit, 12 from bedroom to stove. The calendar still hung on September. No one flipped it. No one noticed. Harold's face stared back at me from the wedding photo near the spice rack. His smile was uneven, charming. He wore a suit one size too big and cologne that smelled like tobacco and rain. I used to press my nose into that scent when days felt too long. Now, I just let the dust gather. I reached for the coffee tin with the rusted lid. Still full, still heavy. The scent hit me like a memory I wasn't ready for. Harold used to hum when the pot gurgled. Off key, always joyful. I listened, but the room stayed quiet. The apron he gave me for our anniversary still hung behind the pantry door. Blue, with a tiny stitched Eiffel Tower. We were supposed to go to Paris. He'd planned the trip for our 20th. Had a guidebook, a phrasebook, even a silly cassette tape of French verbs. But then, our boy shattered his leg at soccer practice. And the bills came. I remember canceling the tickets. I remember the travel agent saying, "You'll reschedule soon, I'm sure." We never did. The guidebook still lives in a drawer with expired coupons and mystery keys. I opened it once last spring. There was a receipt tucked inside. 2 croissants, Bloomington Cafe, April 1993. I stared at it for 10 minutes before closing the drawer. Sometimes it's easier not to remember too much at once. Sometimes, you just hold your breath and boil the water. They never knocked. Just opened the door, like it was still their childhood home. Like I was still standing at the stove in an apron, ready to serve. Elliot came first. The always in a rush, always with a Bluetooth earpiece still blinking. "Mama," he called, dropping a manila folder on the table. "Just need your signature on this." Refinancing the back deck, nothing big. I stared at the folder. Didn't even have to open it. He never asked if I had questions. Never paused long enough to hear an answer. "It'll increase the property value," he added, sipping from the mug I kept just for him. The one with the faded Cubs logo. I hadn't seen that mug clean in weeks. He never washed it. Just left it in the sink, like memory was disposable. He kissed my forehead as he left, still talking into the air, to someone on the other end of his world. Then came Rachel. She only visited when tuition was due. This time, it was about Ava's music camp in Vermont. "Mom, she got in!" Top 2% of applicants. Oh, she twirled in excitement, handing me the printed brochure. All bold fonts and ivy leaves. I wanted to be happy. I was, sort of, but I also noticed the envelope she left next to the sugar jar. No card, no note, just an amount scribbled in blue pen. 12th 700. "It's an investment," Rachel said, "in her future." "You've always believed in potential, Mom," I nodded. But inside, something buckled. Because no one asked if I was okay. If I had dreams left, if I needed anything beyond being dependable. Dependable. Such a heavy word when carried alone. Jessica was last. She didn't bring forms or brochures, just herself, and tears. "Oh, Mama," she said, collapsing into the chair across from me. "The landlord's being awful. Rent's going up again, and I'm barely making payroll." I passed her a napkin. Cloth, not paper. She dabbed her eyes, looked around the kitchen. "You've always managed. I admire that," she whispered. "But I need a co-signer this time. Just for the bank. Just your name." I didn't answer. Just reached for my cup of lukewarm coffee. Let the silence sit between us. She waited, then leaned forward. "This place, this warmth. You've built something solid, Mama," I smiled faintly. Because she saw the walls. Not the woman crumbling inside them. She left with a hopeful smile. I watched her car pull out of the driveway, tires crunching over the frozen gravel. Then I turned to the window. The maple tree was trembling, and so was I. After they left, the silence felt heavier than any noise could. The chairs still held the shape of their bodies. The air smelled faintly of Rachel's perfume, sharp, citrusy, too young for this house. I gathered the cups, washed each one slowly. Let the water run longer than necessary. Steam rose, clouded the window. Outside, the maple stood still again. No wind, just quiet. I dried my hands, reached for the old biscuit tin I kept tucked behind the flour canister. Inside, under a paperclip and 2 safety pins, was my savings log. Leather-bound, corners soft from use. I opened it. Each line was neat, careful. I'd always prided myself on keeping a clear record. No mess, no guessing. The last entry was 4 months ago. Balance, 5,183.17. I blinked. Read it again. No mistake. All those decades, and not enough for even one more decade. I did the math. Rent, groceries, medication, church tithes. Even without emergencies, I had maybe 3 years. 3 years. If I didn't get sick. If the roof didn't leak. If I didn't give one more dollar away. I traced the edge of the page. Then turned to the back cover. There, written sideways in pencil, light, unsure, were 3 words I hadn't remembered writing. I was useful, not loved. My throat tightened. I stared at the words until they blurred. And when they came back into focus, they looked like a diagnosis. All this time, I had fed the belief that my purpose came from giving, from filling in the cracks, from solving other people's almosts. But no one had asked how I was sleeping. No one had noticed the limp in my right leg. No one had seen that I hadn't bought a new coat in 7 winters. Because mothers are meant to be dependable. Not human. Not tired. Just available. I closed the ledger, slid it back into the tin, then sat in the armchair by the window and watched the light fade, inch by inch, across the floorboards. The clock hadn't moved. 3:17 p.m. again. A fixed point in time. Like me. I pressed my hand against the cool window pane, let it rest there, then whispered into the dusk. Not expecting an answer. When you've been needed your whole life. What happens when you finally need something for yourself? It was a Thursday when I found out, not from an invitation, not from a call, but from a photograph. Elliot had posted it on his social media. A picture of the whole family, gathered around a long table, candles flickering, glasses mid-toast. They were celebrating Ava's birthday. The caption read, "So grateful for nights like these." I stared at it for a long time, zoomed in slowly. Rachel was there, in a bright red sweater. Jessica had her arm draped over someone's shoulder. The grandkids, even Ava's piano teacher, I think. Everyone. Except me. No one mentioned it. No one called afterward to explain. They must have assumed I wouldn't notice. That I didn't care for big nights. Anymore. I looked around my kitchen. My casserole dish was gone. That old glass one with the blue trim. It sat right there on the table in the picture, full of green bean almondine. They took it from my cabinet. Didn't ask. Just borrowed. Like my time, like my presence. I scrolled through the other photos. Saw the banner, Sweet 16. Ava saw the cake, lemon poppy seed, my recipe. But no mention of me, no grandma's famous cake. No, Mom helped. Just smiles without context. The next morning, I walked into the living room. Paused by the fireplace. There used to be a picture of me and Harold there, wedding day, black and white, his tie crooked. It had been replaced. Now there was a framed print of a Parisian cafe scene, muted colors, stylized. Solace, I didn't even remember them asking. I sat in my chair, same as always, but the cushion was stiff. Someone had replaced the old one. The indent of my body was gone. I reached for my knitting, but even that had been moved. Put away in a drawer. Neatly, out of sight. For years I'd been the background music, soft, familiar, always there. Now, it seemed they'd pressed mute. No malice. Just convenience. But absence, when unnoticed, is its own cruelty. I held the phone in my hand that night. Thought about calling. Then set it down again. They hadn't meant to hurt me, but they hadn't meant to include me, either. That truth settled heavier than anger ever could. And for the first time in weeks, I felt misplaced. Not in time, not in geography, but in meaning. The next sign was the hallway rug. It had been there since 1989, muted burgundy, soft underfoot, worn in the middle from years of back and forth. One afternoon, I stepped out of the bedroom and nearly slipped. The floor was bare. A sleek new runner had replaced it, gray, geometric, cold. Jessica must have done it. She was helping reorganize while I was at the doctor's. It's more modern, Mama, she'd say. Lighter. Brighter. As if brightness could replace memory. That rug had soaked up Sunday spills, birthday balloons, Harold's muddy boots. It had lines that matched my life. Now, it was rolled up and propped by the door, like an old coat no one wore anymore. I picked it up. The fabric sagged in my arms. It smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and thyme. I pressed my cheek to it for a moment. Then let it go. In the kitchen, the spice rack was rearranged. Paprika in front. My nutmeg tin nowhere to be found. Rachel's doing. She decluttered for me, Jessica said later. She thought it might help you feel less overwhelmed. Overwhelmed. What a word to put in someone else's mouth. No one asked what I used, what I needed. They just assumed. I opened the drawer where I kept Harold's tools. Screwdriver, flashlight, tape, gun, in their place. A plastic basket labeled, Miss. I don't remember the last time someone called to ask how I fixed the bathroom hinge. Or if I wanted to choose a new faucet. These days, things just appeared. Decisions made in group texts I wasn't included in. I stood by the window later that evening. Watched Rachel pull up in her SUV. She came in without knocking, again. Set down 2 grocery bags. Just restock, she smiled. Got rid of the old cans. Some were expired. She meant the Campbell's soup I kept for snowy nights. Harold used to add crackers and call it a poor man's feast. A gone now. Replaced with almond butter and gluten-free pasta. She kissed my cheek and rushed off. Didn't stay long enough to hear me say thank you. I sat on the porch after she left. The cold seeped through the cushion, but I didn't move. The wind rattled the dried leaves on the maple tree. And for a brief moment, I wondered what it would feel like to be asked. To be consulted. To be seen not as someone to manage, but as someone whose voice still mattered. It happened on a Sunday, the kind where everything smelled like laundry soap and leftover roast. Jessica had brought the kids over. She said it would be good for them to reconnect with Grandma. They ran through the hallways, voices bright, feet quick. Like echoes of the past chasing themselves. I baked a small apple tart. The kind Ava used to love when she was younger. She was 16 now, tall, poised, always glancing at her phone. Still, she smiled politely when I handed her a slice. "Thanks, Grandma," she said. "It's, very old school." I smiled. Pretended I didn't notice her only taking one bite. Later, while clearing the dishes, I heard her in the next room. Jessica was showing her the guest bedroom. "And this could be your space when you come home from college," she said. Ava laughed. "But isn't that Grandma's?" Jessica lowered her voice, but I caught every word. "She mostly stays downstairs now. It's just easier. Quieter. You know how it is." My hands froze in the dishwater. I knew that tone. That gentle erasure wrapped in good intentions. "She mostly stays downstairs now." As if I were a fixture, a lamp, a legacy to be navigated around. When did I stop being part of the story? I dried my hands and walked slowly to the hallway. Their voices drifted back into safe topics. School, clubs, scholarships. I stood there for a long moment, unseen. My photo, the one from my 60th birthday, the last time all 3 kids were truly present, had been moved. Now it hung behind a coat rack, slightly tilted. I straightened it, brushed away the dust. The woman in that photo wore a navy dress. Her lipstick was too red. Her smile was wide and sure. I barely recognized her. Back in the kitchen, I picked up the tart plate. Only 2 slices gone. The rest would go stale by morning. I wrapped it in foil, set it by the sink. Then I sat at the table, the same one Harold built with his hands, and stared at the empty chairs. I thought of all the conversations that had happened here. The arguments. The laughter. The decisions. Now, the decisions happened elsewhere. By other people. In faster voices. In rooms I wasn't invited into. I looked around the kitchen. Everything was familiar, and nothing was mine. The chair creaked beneath me. A sound too soft to stop anything. And I thought, when your name is still on the mailbox, but no longer on their minds, where do you belong? The first sign was the envelope. Plain, no return address. Just my name in blue ink. Miriam Delaney. Neat but unfamiliar handwriting. It arrived on a Wednesday, slipped between a grocery flyer and a church bulletin. I set it aside, made tea, tried to forget it. But it sat on the table all day. Quiet. Patient. That evening, Jessica came by. She brought her usual smile, bright and tired. A gym hoodie pulled tight around her frame, the scent of vanilla protein powder trailing behind her. "I didn't want to do this over the phone," she said, pouring herself water without asking. I knew. Even before she reached for the envelope, even before she placed it gently in front of me, like a peace offering. "It's just paperwork," she said. "A bank thing. For the Lees. My credit isn't great right now." She looked at me the way she used to when she scraped her knees. Wide-eyed. Full of need. Not pain, this time. Just expectation. I unfolded the pages. Line after line of fine print. Numbers I didn't recognize. Terms I didn't understand. She pointed to the last page. "Just here, Mama. It's called a guarantee signature, just to help me qualify. No money leaves your account. You're just a name. Just a name." She said it so easily, as if my name had no weight, as if it hadn't been the one holding everything up for 4 decades. I set the papers down. The kitchen felt smaller, walls inching in, or maybe it was me, shrinking. "Do you need time to think?" she asked. I nodded. She smiled like that was the answer she wanted. She kissed my cheek and left the envelope behind. Said she'd check back in a few days. I sat there long after the door closed. The only sound was the tick of the wall clock, slow, uneven, like a heart out of rhythm. I ran my finger along the page. The words blurred, not from tears, just from years of squinting into everyone else's future and forgetting to look for mine. My name. She wanted to borrow my name. I closed the envelope. Set it back on the table. I didn't scream, didn't cry. But something in me folded inward. Something old, something sacred. Because this wasn't about helping. Not anymore. This was about erasing risk from her life, by placing it quietly into mine. That night, I couldn't sleep. The envelope stayed on the table, untouched. But its presence filled the house, like a draft slipping under every door. I got up sometime past midnight. The floor was cold beneath my feet. In the hallway, the nightlight flickered. A weak, golden pulse, like breath. I walked to the roll-top desk in the corner. It still smelled faintly of cedar and ink. Inside the second drawer was my old checkbook, a paper ledger, and a calculator with one sticky key. I turned on the lamp. Its yellow glow softened the edges of everything, except the numbers. Savings 5,083.17, same as before. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. I flipped back through the entries. Hospital bills for Elliot's gallbladder in 2009. Tuition checks for Ava, sent in spring envelopes with butterfly stamps. The time Rachel's car broke down. The time Jessica almost launched her online wellness brand. Each line was tidy, each withdrawal small enough to justify, but together they formed a story. One I hadn't written, one I had only paid for. There was a note tucked between pages, a scrap of receipt paper, faded ink. Love you, Mama. Promise I'll pay you back soon. A no name, no date. But I knew the handwriting, and I knew the promise was older than Ava. I leaned back in the chair. Let the light settle on my lap. My hands looked thinner these days, veins more visible, skin like crumpled tissue. I remembered Harold once said, "Your hands are strong, they don't look it, but they are. They used to be. Now they held the weight of just this once. Last time, I swear." I closed the ledger, tucked it back inside the desk, turned off the lamp. In the hallway, the nightlight had gone out completely. I stood there a moment, letting the dark settle over me like a shawl, and then the thought came. What if something happened to me? What if I signed that form, and the business failed, and the bank came knocking? What would I have left? Not for them. For me. Because I was tired of being a safety net woven out of guilt and habit. Tired of being everyone's fallback plan. Tired of not being considered a person who could fall too. Jessica came back on Saturday. Same gym hoodie. Same hopeful tone. She brought a croissant and a coffee. My usual. From that little cafe on 3rd, she said. The one with the tiny tables you like. I hadn't been there in years. But I nodded anyway. She set the bag down, glanced toward the envelope still sitting on the kitchen table. I know it's a lot. She began, stirring cream into her cup. But it's just paperwork, Mama. Really, the risk is minimal. I listened. The kettle clicked behind me. I didn't move to pour it. She talked numbers. Projected income. Bounce, back plan. Then she said it again. I just need your name. I turned to face her, held her gaze. Then, without a word, I reached for the envelope, slid it across the table toward her. Still sealed, her fingers hesitated. She looked confused. You didn't even open it. I did, I said quietly. But I didn't need to read it twice. She sat back, tried to smile. I just thought, you've always been the one to help. You always said family means showing up. I nodded. I did say that. I reached into the drawer beside me, pulled out an old photograph. Harold holding a newborn Jessica, me standing beside them in a flower-covered apron. I placed it between us. You see this? I asked. She leaned forward. This was the day I returned to work after your birth. I hadn't even stopped bleeding yet. But the oven needed fixing, and there were orders for wedding cakes. She said nothing. My name, I said slowly, has been on everything since then. Every loan, every form, every emergency. Jessica blinked. I know. And we're grateful. No, I said gently. You're used to it. That's different. I stood, walked to the window. The maple outside was trembling in the wind, its branches bare, but unbroken. I turned back to her. If I sign this, and something goes wrong, where will I live? She opened her mouth, closed it. I walked to the counter, poured myself the tea, let the silence steep between us. She picked up the envelope, pressed it flat. I understand, she whispered. But I wasn't sure she did, because the moment I stopped offering was the first time anyone in this house ever had to ask, what does Mom need? That night, the house felt unfamiliar, not because anything had changed, but because, for the first time, I truly saw it without the illusion of usefulness. I wandered from room to room like a guest. The living room still held Harold's old recliner, but it no longer smelled like him. Just dust and time. The kitchen was spotless. Not because someone had cleaned it, but because no one had used it. No flour on the counter. No spoons drying in the rack. No life. I stood by the pantry door and opened it slowly. Rows of cans I hadn't chosen. Cereals I didn't eat. Supplements Jessica swore would help my joints. None of it felt like mine. I closed the door and leaned against it. The wood was cool against my back. It felt steadier than I did. I turned off the lights, one by one. Let the shadows stretch. Let the quiet return. Upstairs, the hallway creaked beneath my steps. That sound had always comforted me. The bones of the house speaking back. But tonight, it sounded like an echo without an origin. I paused outside the guest room. The door was slightly ajar. Inside fresh sheets, Ava's forgotten scarf, a scented candle labeled, fresh linen. The room smelled of departure, of someone passing through. I walked past it, stopped at my own door. The knob felt colder than I remembered, like even it had let go. I stepped inside, turned on the lamp. Its light revealed everything and nothing. The quilt on the bed, hand-stitched by Harold's aunt, was folded perfectly, not out of care, but because no one had disturbed it. I sat on the edge. The mattress barely shifted. In the drawer, next to my glasses case, lay the old notebook. The one I'd stopped writing in 2 years ago. I opened it. The last page was blank. But the indent of the pen still remained. A shallow curve, as if I had started to say something, then thought better of it. I traced it with my finger, then turned to a fresh page. I didn't know what I meant to write. A grocery list. A letter. A final reckoning. But no words came. Instead, I looked up, stared at the ceiling, at the cracked paint in the corner, at the spider web I hadn't noticed, and for the first time in a very long time, I said it out loud. As this it. 3 words. Soft. But too loud for the room. Because deep down, I had always assumed something else was coming. Something waiting. Some chapter I hadn't yet arrived at. But what if this was the end? Not with a bang. Not with drama. Just with silence. Just with the world moving on around me, while I sat still in a house that no longer needed me. The morning after felt quiet in a different way, not peaceful, not restful, just hollow. I didn't make coffee. Didn't open the blinds. Didn't turn on the radio. I sat at the kitchen table, wrapped in Harold's old cardigan. The sleeves still stretched. The elbows thinned out from years of leaning. I stared at the calendar, still on September. It was January now. 4 months gone. No one had flipped the page. No one had noticed. I pushed aside a pile of unopened mail, a church newsletter, a magazine I no longer subscribed to, and at the very bottom, something I hadn't seen in years, a thin, worn folder, creased in the middle, stamped in blue, Air France. My fingers trembled as I pulled it free. Inside, 2 boarding passes, a reservation form, a hand-drawn itinerary with Harold's handwriting. Day 3 Montmartre, pastries plus street music. It was dated 1993. I had forgotten I kept it. I had forgotten what we were supposed to do, what we wanted. I let the papers rest in my lap, closed my eyes, and for a moment, I saw myself on the sign, a younger version, shoulders square, lips parted in laughter, holding a camera, wearing a blue scarf Harold bought from a street vendor. I had a name in that vision. Not just Mom, not Grandma, not Mrs. Delaney, just Miriam. That name felt strange now, too soft for how hard I had lived. But in that image, it felt right. I opened my eyes. The kitchen was still dim, still quiet, but something stirred beneath the silence. Something not quite hope. Not yet. But maybe. Maybe the question wasn't whether this was the end. Maybe the question was whether I still had anything left to begin. I reached for my notebook. The one I had left blank the night before. And this time, the words came. Not many, just one line guess. What would it take to become Miriam again? I stared at it, then underlined it. Twice. I didn't know the answer. Not yet. But I knew this. No one was going to hand me that name back. No one was going to call me by the parts of myself I had forgotten. If I wanted her, the girl with the scarf, the camera, the crooked French, I would have to find her myself. Somewhere in a city I'd never seen. Somewhere beyond this kitchen. Beyond the cardigan. Beyond the calendar still stuck in September. And suddenly, the silence didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like a pause. The breath before the first step. It started with a walk, nothing grand. Just a path I hadn't taken in years. I bundled myself in a coat 2 sizes too large. The zipper stuck halfway, and I left it that way. Outside, the air bit gently at my cheeks. Cold, but not cruel. Bloomington was quiet that morning. Sidewalks damp from melting snow, trees bare but honest. I passed the bakery. Not mine. Ours had closed a decade ago. But the smell was familiar. Warm yeast, vanilla. A whisper of something sweet just out of reach. The new place had glass counters and laminated menus. Young girls behind the register. No apron stains. No flour on the floor. I didn't stop. 2 more blocks, and I reached the library. The building hadn't changed. Still that red, brick warmth, ivy crawling up one side. Inside, it smelled of paper and heating vents. A librarian I didn't recognize smiled. I nodded, walked slowly to the 2nd floor. Travel section. Same shelf, 3rd row, slightly too high. I ran my fingers along the spines. So many titles about places I'd only visited in postcards. And then, tucked between a book on Prague and one about Portugal. French for beginners over 60. Ceased possible. The cover was faded, dog-eared. A coffee ring stained the corner. Perfect. I opened to the first page. Bonjour? Je m'appelle. I mouthed the words. Let them settle on my tongue like honey. I remembered Harold trying to say them in the kitchen once, laughing as he butchered the accent. I borrowed the book. The checkout clerk asked if I wanted to register for the language program. We have a senior class starting next Tuesday, she said. I hesitated, then nodded. It's been a while, I told her. She smiled. Well then, welcome back. Welcome back. I walked home slower, the book tucked under my arm. A breeze pushed against me, but I leaned into it. Like I was walking toward something. Not away. At the corner near Maple and 7th, I passed a mirror shop. The display caught my reflection. I stopped. My coat looked bulky. My face tired. But my eyes, they looked awake. I hadn't seen that in a long time. Back home, I placed the book beside my teacup. The kettle began to whistle. And this time, I poured the water. The classroom smelled like dry erase markers and floor polish, chairs in a circle. A window cracked just enough to let in the cold. 7 of us sat waiting, gray hair, soft sweaters, hands folded over notebooks still crisp. I almost turned back. But the teacher walked in, and it was too late. Her name was Colette. Tall, slender, the kind of woman who wore scarves not for warmth, but for punctuation. She greeted each of us with the same phrase, Bonjour. Comment vous appelez vos. She said it gently, like an offering. When she turned to me, I hesitated, then answered, awkwardly, Je m'appelle Miriam. The accent was wrong. The fdar caught in my throat, but she smiled. Tras bien, Miriam. Hearing my name in another language made it feel new, less burdened, less used. We practiced phrases. Je suis retraité. I am retired. Je habite de Bloomington. I live in Bloomington. Simple things, but they felt like pieces of something I had lost. At the break, a woman named Bernice offered me a butterscotch candy. She wore hearing aids and had perfect penmanship. This class saved me, she said. After my husband passed, I needed a reason to wear shoes again. We laughed. The kind of laugh that starts soft, then surprises you by how much it needed to escape. I hadn't heard myself laugh like that in years. It wasn't loud, it wasn't pretty. But it was mine. When class ended, Colette handed us a slip of paper. Write down one thing you want to say in French before the course is over, she said. I thought for a moment. Then wrote. I waited 40 years to come back to myself. Back home, I placed the paper in my notebook, underlined it, not for grammar, but because it felt true. I brewed a new pot of tea, this time chamomile, delicate, fragrant. I sipped slowly, watching steam rise in ribbons. The house was still quiet, no visitors, no requests, no signatures needed. But I wasn't lonely. Not today. Because somewhere in that classroom, someone had said my name. And I had answered. Not as mother, not as help, not as a name to borrow. Just Miriam. And for once, that was enough. Sunday morning, I walked to St. Paul's. The cold air stung a little less. My scarf was wrapped too loosely, but I let it be. Inside, the pews creaked like they always had. The organ wheezed out a familiar hymn. I didn't sing. Just listened. Father Thomas was there. Older now, with a slight tremor in his hands. After the service, I waited until the crowd thinned. He spotted me by the votive candles. His smile was soft. "Miriam Delaney," he said, voice warm. "Haven't seen you in a few months." "Been quiet," I replied. He nodded. "Quiet can be holy, but not forever." We sat on the bench near the side exit. The light through the stained glass painted us in color. Red across his collar, blue along my sleeve. "I was just thinking," he said. "How Harold once told me your dream was to eat croissants in Paris." I blinked. "I never forgot that," he chuckled. He said, "She deserves the real butter ones. Not the grocery kind." I laughed, just once. Small. But it landed somewhere deep. I hadn't told anyone about Paris in decades. Hadn't thought anyone remembered. He looked at me, kind eyes sharpening. "You still think about it?" I didn't answer. Not right away. But I think he knew. He reached into his coat, handed me something unexpected. A postcard. It showed a riverbank cafe, tiny tables with folded napkins. "I got this in the mail," he said. "No return address. Figured someone sent it to the church by mistake." I turned it over. Blank, no message, no stamp, just a picture. I tucked it into my coat pocket. It felt like something had clicked into place. Not loudly, not dramatically, but firmly. That evening, I cleared the kitchen table, set aside the paperwork, opened the laptop I hadn't used in months. It took 10 minutes to remember the password. Another 10 to find my way around the airline website. I didn't book anything. Not yet. Just search dollars, flights to Paris, one way. Then I opened a second tab, French for Traveler's Audio Guide. I hit play. Listened. Let the voice wash over me. "Bonjour. Je voudrais un billet, s'il vous plaît." "Hello, I would like a ticket, please." I whispered it aloud, then said it again. With less hesitation. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like I was running out of time. I felt like I was finally walking towards something. I started with the small things. The silverware drawer. I sorted through it slowly, kept 4 spoons, 2 forks, 1 butter knife. The rest I boxed. Next was the linen cabinet. Too many sheets. Too many memories. I kept the floral set Harold always said smelled like old church ladies. It made me smile. The rest went into donation bags. I didn't announce anything. Didn't tell Rachel. Didn't text Jessica. Didn't loop Elliot into a family group chat. I moved quietly, like someone brushing dust off an old photograph before slipping it into her pocket. At the library, I printed out a packing list in French. Liste de voyage, vitamins, documents, souvenirs, travel list, clothes, papers, memories. I highlighted the last word, souvenirs. I opened my savings ledger again. Same number, a 5,883.17, still not enough, but maybe enough for a beginning. I sold Harold's record player. He would have understood. The buyer was a man in his 30s, said it was vintage, offered cash. With that money, I bought 2 things: a new suitcase, modest, soft-sided, navy blue, and a one-way ticket to Paris. March 17. The date wasn't random. It was the day Harold died. And now, the day I would begin again. I printed the receipt. Folded it into my recipe book, between lemon poppy seed and apple tart. It felt right. At church, I asked Father Thomas to bless a St. Christopher medal I found in Harold's drawer. He didn't ask questions. He just held my hand and said, "Wherever you go, let them see you, not just watch me. See me." At home, I drafted a letter. It wasn't angry, not even sad, just true. To my children. It began. For 40 years, I gave without pause, because I believed that's what mothers do. But now, I will give myself what I gave everyone else: attention, time, and belief. I folded it carefully. No envelope yet. Not until I boarded. Each night, I practiced phrases, not from a language book, but from my own mouth. Je suis Miriam. I am Miriam. Je vais seul. I'm going alone, not lonely, alone, by choice, by grace, and for the first time, by design. The pawn shop smelled of old leather and time. I hadn't been there in decades. The bell above the door chimed low, like it remembered me. A man behind the counter looked up, thin glasses, kind eyes. I placed the box gently before him. Inside, my wedding ring, gold, slightly dented, engraved with Harold's initials, HD and MW 1972. The man opened it with care. He didn't ask why I was selling it. Didn't try to make it sentimental. He simply examined the band, weighed it, then said, "Fair price, clean gold, classic cut." I nodded. He handed me an envelope. I didn't count the bills. Just folded it into my coat pocket. Outside, the wind had picked up, but my hands didn't shake. Back home, I opened the hallway closet. The cedar box Harold built sat on the top shelf. It creaked when I pulled it down. Inside, old church bulletins, dried corsages, postcards from summer road trips. I sorted through them slowly, one by one. I kept the postcard from Niagara Falls. The one with his handwriting smudged from rain. Next, stop, the Eiffel Tower. I set aside the programs from the kids' high school plays. Each one had my name in the back. Concessions, Miriam Delaney. I smiled. I didn't need all the papers to remember. But it felt right to touch them again. I packed a small envelope labeled, "For me." Inside, the Niagara postcard, the French class slip, the letter to my children. I tied it with a thin blue ribbon, tucked it into the suitcase. In the kitchen, I opened the spice drawer. The nutmeg tin had been pushed to the back. I brought it forward again. The scent hit me. Warm, musky, familiar. I left it there. Let it be seen. By evening, I had cleared one drawer, 2 shelves, and the top of the dresser. Not erased, just lightened, like someone preparing for weather. Or flight. I sat on the edge of the bed. The lamp cast soft rings of gold on the walls. I reached for the place where the ring had always rested. The skin was lighter there, unmarked, not empty, just released. I closed my eyes, listened. The house didn't feel like it was letting go of me. It felt like it was saying goodbye. Softly, gently, as if it knew I wasn't leaving out of anger. I was leaving because the door had always been there, and I was finally ready to open it. The morning I left, no one knew. Not because I wanted to punish them, but because I didn't want to be stopped. The suitcase stood by the door, navy blue, wheels slightly crooked. Inside, 2 sweaters, 1 worn pair of shoes. The ribboned envelope marked, "For me." I made tea one last time. Chamomile. Poured it into my favorite mug, cracked, white, painted with fading violets. I didn't sit, just stood by the window, watching light slide across the maple tree. The branches were still bare. But I swore, one bud had started to open. I walked through the house slowly, tugged the curtains closed, turned down the thermostat, left a note for the mailman. Nothing dramatic. Just a line, temporarily away. Do not forward. At the hallway table, I placed the letter to my children. No accusations, no guilt. Only this, Chor. If you find this, it means I'm safe. Tor, not just physically, but wholly. Tor, don't look for me out of duty. Tor, find me if you're ever curious about who I was before I became useful. I sealed it, left it under the ceramic bowl that still held 3 old keys. At the porch, I paused. The air was soft, early spring coming in whispers. Birdsong, distant wind chimes. Nothing theatrical. I touched the doorframe with one hand. Whispered, "Thank you." Not to the house. To the woman who had survived inside it. The taxi arrived on time. The driver helped with the suitcase. "Heading far?" he asked. I smiled. Far enough to remember who I was. He didn't ask more. At the airport, I moved slowly through the terminal. The woman at the gate took my boarding pass and smiled. "First time to Paris." "Less," I said, then paused. "First time anywhere." She laughed softly. "Well then, bon voyage." The plane was cold, the seat stiff, but I sat upright, steady, watched the tarmac drift away, watched the sky widen. When we lifted off, my hand gripped the armrest, not out of fear, out of awe. This was not a second chance. It was the first one I chose for myself, and somewhere below, my name remained on mailboxes, bank forms, family recipes. But up here, I belonged only to me. What would it mean? To build a life not from obligation, but from breath. I didn't know yet, but I was ready to find out. Jessica was the first to arrive. She had a key. Let herself in like always, balancing 2 iced coffees and her gym bag. "Mama," she called, halfway up the stairs. No answer. She set the drinks down, checked the bedroom. The bed was made. Tightly, neatly. Too neatly. In the kitchen, the kettle was empty. The mug rack held all 6 cups. The calendar still read September. Jessica frowned. Something was off. Then she saw the envelope on the hallway table. Cream. Colored, her name written in steady, familiar script. She opened it slowly. Read the words twice. Her hand trembled. Rachel came next. She brought Ava. They were planning to drop off brochures for another summer program. The door was unlocked. The lights were off. Rachel called out. Nothing. She walked to the dining room and paused. Ava followed, confused. On the table lay 3 envelopes. One for each of them. Elliot arrived last. Called because Jessica had finally decided something was wrong. He read his letter standing. Didn't say a word. They sat around the dining table. No one touched the teapot in the center. No one reached for the tin of cookies that had always been there. Because it wasn't just that Miriam was gone. It was how. No drama, no explosion. Just absence. And that absence filled the house louder than any accusation. They walked the rooms, opened drawers. Found things missing, things rearranged. Her suitcase gone. The rings gone. The letter to them was clear, measured, impossible to argue with. Chor, you all needed me for a long time. Chor, I was proud to be needed. Chor, but now, I need myself. Chor, don't think of this as leaving you. Chor, think of it as returning to me. Ava found the French book on the nightstand. She flipped through it, then stopped. A boarding pass. Air France. Tucked between the pages. No return date. Jessica reached for a chair but didn't sit. Rachel covered her mouth with one hand. Elliot turned toward the kitchen. Everything looked the same, but nothing was. In the silence, it became painfully clear. Miriam hadn't vanished. She had chosen. And in doing so, she had said the one thing none of them had ever dared to ask. What happens when a mother stops being everyone else's answer? That evening, the house was quieter than it had ever been. Not the soft quiet Miriam used to keep. With simmering soup and slippers on the floor. This was a cold kind of stillness. Sterile. Final. Jessica sat at the kitchen table, running her fingers along the rim of her untouched coffee cup. She didn't even say goodbye, she whispered. Rachel leaned against the counter, arms crossed, eyes red. She did, she said quietly. We just didn't know how to hear it. The Elliot stood in the hallway, staring at the empty spot where the family photo used to hang. She took it, he asked. No one answered, but the absence said enough. On the fridge, a small magnet held up a note. Handwritten, faded with time. Buy more nutmeg. Secca. Rachel pulled open the spice drawer. There it was, front and center, the lid wiped clean. She touched it like it might burn. She moved it forward, Rachel said. Like she wanted us to see it. Jessica wiped her nose. She always used nutmeg in her apple tart, she said. She always did everything, Elliot muttered. Then, quieter. And none of us ever asked what she wanted. They walked through the house differently now, not as children returning, but as strangers trying to understand a place they had assumed would never change. Ava picked up the French book again. Flipped to the inside cover. There, in Miriam's looping cursive, the vers, I am not running away. I am running towards something I almost forgot I deserved. Rachel reached for the letter Miriam had left them. Read the last paragraph aloud. Chor, my love for you is not gone. Chora, but love is not the same as availability. Chorter, sometimes love is distance. Chor, sometimes it's a locked door. Chor, sometimes it's a name spoken only by the person who owns it. Jessica let out a breath that sounded like a sob and a laugh wrapped into one. She always said her name meant wished for child, she said. But we never wished for her. We just expected her. Outside, the wind picked up. A tree branch tapped gently against the window. Rhythmic, insistent, like a question waiting to be answered. They stood in the hallway together. 3 adults, 3 versions of guilt, and one house that had stopped being home the moment its heart stepped out the door. Elliot spoke first. "What do we do now?" Rachel didn't answer. Jessica looked down at the letter and said, "We stop calling it her house and start asking why none of us ever invited her into ours." The cafe was quiet. Mid-morning light spilled across the tile floor in long, forgiving lines. Outside, bicycles rattled over cobblestone. Inside, the scent of butter and espresso hung in the air. Miriam sat near the window. A fresh croissant on a blue ceramic plate, a small glass of apricot jam, one napkin. Folded once, she opened her tablet, connected to the cafe Wi-Fi, typed slowly. "To Rachel, Jessica, Elliot Torp subject bonjour." She paused. Let her hands rest on the table. There was no rush now, no one waiting, no one tapping a toe while she found her words. She sipped her espresso. Let it linger, bitter, rich, grounding. Then she typed, "Tor, I arrived safely. Tor, the air smells like bread and small beginnings. Tor, I hope you're well." She looked out the window. Two women walked by, laughing. One wore a scarf the same shade as Miriam's coat. The other carried tulips wrapped in newspaper. Miriam smiled, then continued, "Tor, I'm not angry. Tor, I'm not lost. Tor, I'm not yours to fix or fold into your plans. Tor, I am, for the first time in a very long time, sure exactly where I need to be." She didn't sign it. Mom didn't say, "Love always." She just wrote Miriam. She hit send. Closed the tablet. Sat with both hands wrapped around the coffee cup, letting the warmth move into her palms. Around her, conversation buzzed low. Dishes clinked. A child laughed. Someone whispered, "Mercy." She listened to the world without needing to answer it. Not out of bitterness, but out of belonging. For decades, she had written her worth in casseroles, calendars, and quiet sacrifice. Now, it was being rewritten in foreign words, in long walks beside the sign, in silence that wasn't empty, just finally hers. She opened her notebook, wrote one line. "A justice is not loud, it just no longer apologizes for arriving." Sure, she underlined it once, then folded the page. Outside, clouds drifted. Inside, time didn't hurry her. She sat very still, not because she had nowhere to be, but because she had finally arrived. Halange Passy. My apartment in Paris is very small. One window, one table, one narrow bed with a blue wool blanket folded at the foot. But the light makes it feel like a chapel. Mornings begin quietly. I open the shutters and let in the sounds: bakers setting out baskets. Broom bristles against stone. Distant laughter that doesn't need translating. I boil water in a dented kettle. It takes longer than the one back home. But the whistle sounds softer, less urgent. My teacup here has no match. Just one. Ivory porcelain with a hairline crack. I like it. It reminds me that use doesn't equal damage. I've begun writing again. Not in journals. On postcards. I never send them. Just write little things. Today, I saw a child feed pigeons like they were sacred. Or, the woman at the bakery called me madame, like it meant something noble. I keep the postcards in a box under my bed. Maybe someday I'll scatter them across park benches. Leave them behind like breadcrumbs. Little proofs of return. Once a week, I visit the market at Rue Claire. The vendor knows my name. He says it's slowly am, like he's still learning it, like I am too. I buy cheese wrapped in wax paper, figs when they're in season, and sometimes a single white rose. The petals never last long, but they soften the room while they're here. I take French classes on Tuesdays. Our teacher is younger than my grandson. He teaches verbs with too much energy, but he calls us mesdames, my ladies. And somehow, we all sit a little taller. At the end of each class, we take turns reading short sentences aloud. This week, mine was, Jesus Hirus, me Seul. Second, I am happy, even alone. I stumbled on the last word. But the meaning didn't. It settled around me like a shawl. On Sundays, I walk by the river. Sometimes I sit. Sometimes I don't. Once, I heard a street violinist play a tune I couldn't name. But it pulled something deep from the chest. I closed my eyes and let it rise. Didn't stop it. Didn't shape it. Just let it come. Like forgiveness. Not for them. For me. There are still days when I miss the sound of footsteps in the hallway. or the clutter of casserole dishes, or someone calling out mom. But the ache has softened. Now, when I think of them, I don't feel erased. I feel separate. And somehow whole. I didn't leave to be forgotten. I left to remember, and in doing so, I became someone worth remembering. Not for what I gave, but for what I reclaimed. My name, my time, my breath. That is my legacy now. And it's more than enough. This morning, the light came in softer than usual. Paris had rained the night before. The cobblestones were still wet, glistening like old silver. The cafe awnings dripped in rhythm with the pigeons' coos. I sat by the window. Notebook open, pen resting gently between my fingers. The tea had cooled, but I kept sipping it anyway. It's not warmth I need these days. It's rhythm. The steady quiet between sips, the slow turning of a page. The breath before a new word. I'd written 3 lines already, then paused, looked out the window. An old man was helping a little girl tie her shoe. They didn't speak. He simply crouched, looped, and patted her knee when he finished. She smiled. Ran ahead. He stayed behind. That moment stayed with me. Because sometimes, legacy isn't what we leave. It's what we no longer have to carry. I turned back to the page and wrote. I used to think I was only real if someone needed me. Then underlined it. Twice. There's a quiet, strange freedom that comes when you're no longer required. At first, it aches. Like wind through a door you forgot you'd opened. But then, you realize the space is yours now. To fill. Or to leave open. To listen. Or to speak. I've started speaking again. Not loudly. Not to anyone in particular. Just to the sky some mornings. To the bread as it rises in the oven. To myself in mirrors I no longer avoid. Sometimes I whisper my name. Just to hear it belong. Miriam. Still here. Still whole. I don't know if my children will ever fully understand why I left, but I hope, someday, they'll understand what I was trying to find. Not distance. Not punishment. Just recognition. The kind that doesn't require giving something away in exchange. The kind that begins quietly. With one suitcase, a faded boarding pass, and the courage to be seen without being needed. I leave you now, dear listener, with one question I once wrote on a napkin, the first day I arrived in this city. If you were free to choose who you are, not for anyone else, but for yourself, who would you become? You don't have to answer right away. Just carry the question gently, like a seed in your coat pocket. Because even after 60, 70, 80 years, there are still things waiting to bloom. We invite you to share your own story below. You are not alone in your journey. Your voice still matters. And here at Kamar FM, we believe every story is a second chance.